All right, so this is our, oh, I should have put it in here. I'll do it right now. So it's section 1-3, and it's, have I only taught one lesson of this, or? Can't remember if it's A or B. Let's call it B. It might be C, but who cares? And let me type in what this is about. So this is a combination of a couple things that we've already done, right? And that's what happens in math a lot. Everybody's listening, right? So what happens a lot in math is you learn a thing here, you learn a thing here, you learn a thing here. And then eventually you put all that stuff together to make one big old thing, right? And that's kind of what we're doing today. All right, so this is called, and you're like, wait a minute, we've already done this, right? But what are we going to have? We're going to have quadratic equations. Well, we're going to have i's in it, right? We're going to have imaginary numbers or complex numbers, okay? In complex numbers. All right, so we're going to do quadratic equation today. We're going to warm up to it a little bit before we do the quadratic equation, but we're going to include that imaginary number stuff. I told you the other day, I took a class in college. It was called complex analysis. Let's everybody listen, please. Took a class in college that was called complex analysis. And basically, what that class was doing all the math that we had done before, like calculus and things like that. But instead of doing it in real numbers, we did it with imaginary numbers or complex numbers. Okay, I had a whole entire course on that stuff. All right, I couldn't stand my professor. I couldn't stand him. The class itself, the material wasn't that bad. I kind of enjoyed that a little bit. Man, what was his name? I shouldn't even say it on the YouTubes because it might get out there. But anyway, this guy. I told you the story of the guy that. I told you the story of the guy that went around. He said, when you're finished your test, or when I tell you, make sure you put your pencil down. And then this little girl, sweet little girl, never gave anybody trouble. Didn't I tell you about that? He went over and took her and ripped it right in front of her, and she started crying. Yeah, well, that was the professor I had for complex analysis. I don't even know if he's still alive or not, but I mean, for goodness sake, it was 30-something years ago that I had it. So it's probably like, man, it's been pushing 40 maybe, 38 years maybe, something like that. So he's probably in his 50s then, at least in his 40s. So I don't know if he's still around or not, but I won't say his name. Protect the innocent. All right, here we go. Remember this. What's I squared equal to? -1. Okay? It's not a U. It's an I. Oh, you weren't here yesterday. It's an I. I make my eyes weird. Okay, that's how you probably make an I. I kind of make mine with a little curl like that. It's like a cursive I. I don't know. I just always make my eyes like that, so that's what my I looks like. Okay? So let's do this. Let's go right to the example. Example 9, if you're following along in the book. It says evaluate the following. Part A is really easy. It's the square root of -1, but we've defined this. There's still a lot of talking going on, okay? We've started, if you haven't noticed. Some of you haven't noticed. There we go. All right, the square root of -1. If I asked you to evaluate, that's what these problems tell you to do. Evaluate, or just tell me what this is equal to. The square root of -1. It's not just a 1. We got this from it, right? It's I, the square root of -1, and that's just the definition. That's the definition of I. The square root of -1 is equal to I. It's an imaginary number. All right? That's the first thing that we talked about when we talked about imaginary numbers. Now, we're going to do a little bit of work with this. Now, what this is doing, the little bit that we're going to do right now, it's not even quadratic equation just yet, but it's going to lead us into the quadratic equation, because when we get our answer, what we're going to do is get an answer. You know how in that quadratic equation, a lot of times you got like plus or minus square root of some number, right? But instead of like the square root of 13, it's going to be the square root of 13i. You follow me? All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to get a negative answer inside the square root. So before we did complex numbers, if I got a negative answer inside a square root, we would have always said, there's no solution. There's no real number solution. And that would be true. There is no real number solution. What is the solution? The solution is not a real number, but a what? A complex number, okay? Remember, complex is the combination of an imaginary with a real, all right? So anyway, let's do this. What if I asked you to evaluate this or figure out what that's equal to, or simplify, if you want to call it that? Everybody look at that. The square root of -4. Now, a lot of you, before we did imaginary numbers, what would you have said? Can you take the square root of a negative number? It used to be where we said, no, you couldn't do it, because you can't take a number times itself and get a negative number, can you? But with imaginary numbers, we can get an imaginary number, okay? So let's work this out. So what is -4? Well, it's the same thing as 4 times -1. Would you agree? Okay. Now let's break this up into 2 different square roots. How would we break it up? The square root of 4 and what else? Square root of -1. Everybody see that? Isn't that the same exact thing as this? But what did we just learn right here? What is the square root of 4? It's just plain old 2. And what's the square root of -1? It's just I, and then there it is right there. Okay? Everybody with me? So that's not too bad, is it? All right, so when you see it, basically it's this. If you see a negative inside the square root, what can you just do to it? Just pull it out front and make it a what? An I. So what if I had this? I said this number earlier. This isn't in the examples, but this is just for us to think about. What is this? Like off the top of your head, you should be able to look at this and tell me what that's equal to. It's the square root of 13, what? I. That's it. Pretty simple, isn't it? All right? Because I could have done this. I could have gone through these steps right here and right here. But now you see what happens. When I have a square root inside of a negative number, basically what happens is you just get rid of the square root and you stick an I out in front. Everybody see that? So it's the same thing here. I got rid of that negative inside the square root and I just turned it into an I, because this is the square root of -1. Square root of -1 is I, and so that's what that would simplify to. Let's do another one. This is C, part C, square root of -8. I'll give you 15 seconds. Go. Work it out. Get an answer. Everybody do that. You might be able to do it in your head. I don't know. Some of you will. First of all, apply what we just did right here. It's not 8i. Okay. But are you finished simplifying if you just write the square root of I? Watch. What do we do with that negative inside the square root? Turn it into a what? No, not a positive. Turn it into an I. All right. So we get rid of the negative and it turns into an I. Now, it's not under the square root. Everybody understand that? See how it's outside that square root? But is this simplified right here? It's not, because I can simplify the square root of 8. So let's break it down. Square root of 8 is what? 4 times 2. Don't forget the I. That's it. And so I'm going to do one more step. Watch. It's the square root of 4 times the square root of 2. Again, don't forget the I. What's the square root of 4? It's just 2. And then you got the square root of 2i. That right there is the same thing as the square root of -8. See what I did? All right. Did you guys do this in Algebra 2? Like square roots? Not the I stuff, but the square root stuff? Yeah. I think you had a whole chapter just on simplifying square roots, didn't you? Yeah. And you probably did the I's in Algebra 2 as well, didn't you? So this is not your first time learning about the I. Okay. All right. Let's do another one. This is a little bit different. This is example 10. Guys. Example 10a. Now these, they don't say evaluate, they say solve. Okay, so we're going to solve for something. Whatever the variable is, it's x in both of these. We're going to solve for x. So here we go. X. This is just to warm you up a little bit. What if I said that? We've done this before. This is not new. This is just warming you up for the next one. Square root both sides. That's right. Square root that, right, to get rid of the square. Square root that. But now, I didn't do it on the other one. I probably should have. When we took the square root of 4, I probably should have put plus or minus out in front, shouldn't I? Okay? But on this one, let's do it for this one. Okay? So this is going to be plus or minus, right? And right, square root of 4 is 2, but you got a plus or minus out front, plus or minus 2. If you look in the book will probably write it like this. They'll put that little brace thing. They always put the smaller number first, then the bigger number. All right, so this is the way that the book will write the answer. I'm perfectly fine if you keep your answer like that. Okay? Yeah.
For the plus or minus,
yeah.
Where did you just put that on there?
Yeah, because when you take the square root of something, it's plus or minus. Because let's go back to this. Equals 4. So if you put x in for there, if I put a positive 2 in for x, what's positive 2 squared? It's 4, isn't it? What if I put a negative 4 in for x and square it? I get a 4. So both of those answers are true, aren't they? Yeah. All right, so if I put a positive 2 in for x, it works. If I put a negative 2 in for x, it works. That's why we have 2 possible answers for this. Okay, because if I put it back into the equation, both of them work. All right, everybody understand that? Okay. Now, again, that was just a warm-up for this little part right here. And everything we've done so far is going to be a warm-up to what we're going to do after this. All right, so we're just kind of making our way to the real problem at hand. Now, look at this. This is a little different now. Yes, I will. What about this? Well, what's our first step? Square root, right. Square root this side, put a plus or minus out in front. Okay? Let's simplify this, though. But what's the difference between this one and the one we just did without 4? You got a negative inside the square root. So I'm going to put plus or minus. I'll tell you what, I'll do every step. You might be able to do this in your head, but I'll do every step. So it's going to be plus or minus 9. Now, what did we do to that negative inside the square root? Turn it into an I and put it outside the square root. Okay? Some people will put the square root before, okay, but a lot of people will put it after. It really doesn't make any difference. But remember what the standard form is. It's a plus bi, so that's why we usually put it at the end, okay? And let's just simplify that now. What's the square root of 9? It's 3, so it's plus or minus 3i. But what's it going to look? And that'd be fine. You circle that. I'm good with that. You put that on a quiz or a test, perfectly fine. But if you look in the back of the book, what do you think they're going to have? Not negative 3, negative 3i, comma, what? Positive 3i, okay? So that's the way it'll look in the book. I'm perfectly fine if you just keep it like this right there. We good? Okay, all that to do a quadratic, all right? So let's now do a quadratic. And this will be good practice for us. We just had a quiz on it. The quiz didn't really go the way I wanted it to go. But we got another chance to learn quadratics. Have you noticed that just because we learned something in the past doesn't mean that we never do it again? Doesn't it sometimes, not all the time, but doesn't it sometimes come back again? Absolutely. So that's why it's important to learn it in the first place, because it's not going to be over. You're going to use it later on. All right, that's what's so important about making sure you learn the old stuff. All right, here we go. You're going to ask to solve, and it says solve by using the quadratic formula. I'm not going to write that in there, but solve by using the quadratic formula. So here's the problem. Okay, there it is. Looks simple enough, right? Nothing super crazy. Looks pretty easy. You'd think we could just factor this, don't you? But I don't think it'll work, would it? Because what times what is 8? 8 times 1, 2 times 4. Is there any way to get a negative 4 out of that? There's not. So we can't really factor it, okay? So we could complete the square. I know you guys don't like completing the square that much, but let's use the formula. Plus, they tell you. They tell you you got to use the formula. Let's remember what the formula is. You haven't forgotten it yet, have you? What is it? X equals negative b plus or minus b squared AC. That whole thing. Notice, see that negative b? That's over top of the fraction as well. Some of you guys are just taking that square root and putting your fraction thing underneath that square root. The whole thing is over what? 2a. All right? So let's write down what our a, b, and c are. We like to do this, don't we? All right, so what's the a in this situation? It's a 1, right, because that's the 1 right there. Remember, it's a squared b, it's ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So the a is 1, so put a 1 right there. What is the b? It's negative 4. Okay, always take the sign out in front. So it's a negative 4. And what's the c? It's 8. Now we plug in chug. So x equals, you don't like that? Negative b. So what's that going to be? What's negative b? It's going to be a positive 4. But I thought you said negative, Mr. Hamrick. Well, I did. It's the opposite. Negative means opposite. It's the opposite of negative 4. It's negative, negative 4. Everybody see that? Which is positive 4. Plus or minus, square root. B squared. Let's do that in our head. What's b squared? Negative 4 squared. It's 16. Is it negative 16 or positive 16? It's positive. You asked that. You said that like it was a question. Nisia. Be confident. Be confident in your answers. Minus 4 times a times c. What was the a? 1. What was the c? 8. That whole thing, the whole entire thing is over 2 times a, or 2 times what? Which is just 2. All right? We good so far? Let's keep going. That was easy. Would you agree? Am I just saying that just because I'm the teacher? No, it was actually easy. Would you agree? Yeah. All right. Plus or minus, square root. Let's figure out what this is. 4 times 8 is what? Come on, 8 times 4, 32. So what is this? This is 16 minus 32. Can you do that in your head? Aspen, I'm up here. It's negative 16. Okay? Now that's a huge difference from what we did before with quadratics. What's the big difference? It's a negative inside of a square root. So back when we took the quiz on the quadratic equation, we never saw a negative inside the square root. Actually, I think, didn't they have one problem on the worksheet where you had a negative inside the square root? And I said, don't worry about it. We'll get to that later. Okay, now it's later. Okay, now we're getting to it. Over what? 2. Now, here's where we do the stuff that we just finished doing. All right? Not right there, but right here. It's the square root of negative 16. Let's see if we can do this in our head. Can you do that in your head without writing all the steps? What do you do with that negative? Turn it into an I. And then you take the square root of 16. What's the square root of 16? It's 4, and so it's 4 what? I. Everybody see that? Over 2. Yep. Very good. But let's do the steps just so everybody sees. Okay, so watch. I'm going to take 4 over 2 plus or minus. Look, I took 4 divided by 2, but I also have to take the other one and divide that by 2 as well. Okay, so I've got 4 over 2i. Everybody see that step? That's a step that some of you guys are having a tough time with. So that over 2, that over 2. Now we can write our final answer. What's it going to be? 2 plus or minus 2, and then an I. And that's it. I'm perfectly fine. In fact, I would prefer that you just leave your answer like this. But what's it going to look like in the book? It's going to be those crazy braces, right? And it's going to be 2. Well, I think they probably put the minus first. Probably put 2 minus 2i, comma, and then 2 plus 2i. Oops. It's that. All right? So that's what it will look like in the book. I'm perfectly fine if you just keep it like that. That's it. That's the only example they give you. What do you think? Was there really anything new today? Not really. A little bit with this part right there, right? The square root of a negative number. But we broke it down into stuff that wasn't new. So it's, it's kind of stuff, everything pretty much we did today is stuff that we've already done before. That's kind of nice. Oh, it's nice if you remembered how to do it before, right? It's not nice if you didn't know how to do it, but maybe it is because maybe you learned it for the first time today, even though we've done it before. All right, enough of that. Your homework is section 1-3, and I think this is part B, and it's page 117, and it's 53 to 71 odds. That's on your lesson plan. I gave your lesson plans to you on Monday, so it's the same thing. It should be. Is it? I didn't even check because I wrote it down in a different spot. Yep, 53 to 71 odds. All right, that's your homework, and that will be due tomorrow. Remember, taking a quiz on Friday, okay?